Okay, welcome everybody on this sunny Thursday afternoon or morning here, almost afternoon here. This is Pheng, he, him, his with the Metamascan Folks Network. Welcoming all of you and all of the siblings and brothers here to our 18th series of Kitchen Table Conversations discussing current events and issues and experiences of Metamascan folks and how do we as men and masculine folks in the state of Minnesota really navigate these current events and current issues or experiences that we're all having, and how do we strive to be healthier in our own lives as men and masculine folks without using harm or without using violence in that. Today we're really honored to have some other folks join us as well, and they'll introduce themselves to all of you before I continue on our discussion today.
I'm Roderic, Southall, dialing in from Minneapolis. Sorry about that, Sean. Dialing in from Minneapolis North Side. Glad to be here, he, him.
Hello, everyone, and my name is Felix Martinez, pronouns he, him, and his. Super happy to be here. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Serrano Robinson. I use he, him, his pronouns. I work for Menace Peacemakers, and I'm happy to be here with y'all. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Sean Elmquist, he, him, his. I also work at Menace Peacemakers, and I'm glad to be here for the first time.
Oh yes, thank you, Sean Elmquist. It is, so welcome to you and Serrano for coming back again. Sean Hayes and Ed Heisler are out today at a different training, so that's why they're not here in the conversation. And as always, Austin is monitoring the chat threads on Facebook. For those of you who are enjoying the conversation or joining the conversation with us at this moment and participating with us, definitely have your comments and questions rolling in, and we'll incorporate it into the conversation as we move in the conversation in very organic ways. So appreciating him for always doing the background there for us and the tech stuff. So there's a couple of things, right, that we wanted to make sure that we touch on or continue the conversation from 2 weeks ago about what is justice and what is safety, but really concentrating on what does safety look like for our communities in light of the Duante Wrights killing and the verdict that we all had experienced Tuesday. Yeah, on Tuesday. I thought it was yesterday. It was Tuesday, Lord. But I think that it's a very timely conversation for us as men, masculine folks to really think about like these two positions of having another murder while another one hasn't even been done yet in terms of the verdict not coming out yet until just this very recent week. And so I think that because we do have a different group of folks here, it'll be an interesting conversation for us to all again continue the conversation from last week. Just maybe sharing where you're at, how you're feeling in light of what had transpired in the last 2 weeks here. Where's your heart? Where is your body? Where is your mind?
Hello, everyone. Right now, my mind is in, family of George Floyd and all the people directly affected for what happened. That we know that's the center, but the community in Wise has been affected in so many ways. My mind is in my family also, as communities of colors, thinking in their safety and providing ways to the community to have resources and tools so they can advocate for themselves and and hopefully prevent situations like did happen in, to our community, something that happened, you know, now it's obviously look like it's happening every week, it's a new killing, something is going on. So uh, I personally, obviously probably a little bit of anxiety, stress. Every time I get to the news, there's something new, and trying to look for ways so I can take care of myself, take care of my loved ones, or my friends and family members, and trying to support also people that I know that are going through difficult times, trying to reach out them and support in the best way possible. And cases that I can, I'll try to look for other, resources out there. So for me, it's very important to my loved ones understand that it's okay to ask for help, and we don't need to keep, all that pain sometimes on us just because it's not healthy. So I'm hopeful with the verdict that things are going to change now. We saw the power of community and the importance of not forgetting, what happened right now, and to continue, getting or working in our community to continue doing what we're doing right now, making those baby steps so we can live in societies and communities that are more safe and equal.
Um, I'd say where I'm at, like honestly, I'd say it just sits like around a lot of anger. But I think with most people, when we're sitting with anger, there's actually something like deeper than that. But there's anger as well for me, but I'm also gonna go in depth about what's deeper than that. And what's deeper than that is like it's hurt. Like it's really it's I think for me as a young adult, like I'm used to using words like fucked up or just words that like have no true like emotional ties to it. But it's like, and I'm now using the words like heartbreaking more because that's exactly what it feels like. Like it's heartbreaking. Like, sorry, I have a dog and somebody just knocked on the door. But of course, we want to say it's fucked up that a cop shot it. And no, it's heartbreaking. Like it broke my fucking heart. Like to see that that's happening, to see that that's still a true reality that we live in. But above that is anger, obviously. But for most people, when they're angry, there's that like there's an underlying actual feeling that we're denying. And for me, it's hurt. Like it definitely is. Like I can't pretend like, oh, I'm all big macho. Like the shit is fucking scary. It really is. It's scary to be somebody of color, to be on the marginalized, to be shit even bigger than 6 feet. Just certain things that you have to think about yourself that you never should have to think about in a way, right? Like why should people be afraid of me type of a deal? That should never be a thought in your head or in your mind or in your heart. So for me, it definitely like on the topical part, like on top, it's definitely anger. It happens. Yeah, it literally is happening. Damn near, it feels like every week. Um, yeah, every week. And then what hurts more is like you see people like throwing stones at the person who died. Like I don't think there's ever going to be a reason that somebody should be like killed. Now, don't get me wrong. There's self-defense, and that's a completely different conversation. Like actual like self-defense, like in terms of literally saving yourself in a moment. But other than that, I don't think nobody like deserves to be like killed, especially somebody young. And that's the biggest thing that we're seeing. We're seeing all these people who were saying are the future or who we're trying to protect. Like they're the ones who are being taken out. Like a lot of them are really, really young, and that's what really hurts the most. Is they're like taking people who didn't even find that identity, didn't find that voice, who didn't find that way to be themselves, and it just hurts being young, like just in general. Like it hurts. Like people just feel like you're supposed to see shit and like have it roll off a duck's back like water, and it's hard. Like it's hard seeing somebody who was 20 and I'm 25 be killed, and last year was Ahmaud Arbery, and he was around his 20s too, and so you definitely feel guilt and scared at the same time. Like if somebody younger than you can be killed, then there's really there's no criteria to this shit. Like, um, and sorry, I just like speak really, so it might seem like it's things, but it just there's no like it's just a really big reality to it. So I would say for me, like where I'm feeling like my heart is like in the worst place it can be, like maybe in the head is where my heart is at. Like I feel like a bull, just like ready to run through it trying to shop, but knowing that that's not the solution, right? Like also being able to be old enough to know that that's not right, being able to separate validation from actual response. Because I'm I'm validating the fuck out of myself and everybody who feels a certain way. Obviously, but for me, like going to hurt somebody else ain't the key, right? or going to like do what my 10-second me wants to do as a young Black man, it ain't gonna work, right? Like it's just gonna endure more harm and more violence. So for me, what helps me is just being honest about how I feel in the moment in time. There's nothing wrong with just being angry. Because I could clearly be next, right? Like it's really harmful to hear, for you to ask yourself like, or for you to tell yourself like, this can be me. And that's been a question, like everybody literally asks that question. And then that's how you know it's real. Whether you want to believe in racism, people always ask like, what if that person was like of color? When something happens to somebody who's white and they're able to actually go home safely, like the people who went into the actual into the sorry, I'm not big on news, so I might be like messing up names, but the folks who ran down into the buildings and went into the Capitol and things like that, it's really harmful to hear anybody say like, but what if they were of color? What if they were all women? Like, but that is the main question, that whether you're of color or not is in the back of you, was in the back of the night of, I guarantee you 99% of people, 99% of people, and yes, there were people of color there, but we mean the group of people of color, like the group that you label us as, right? For us to even ask, like, if that was Black people storming the Capitol, if that was people of color. So if we have to ask that question, we're in a wrong space. And that's a lot of where the anger comes from. It's from confusion. Like, I'm very confused. Obviously I know why, but it's very confusing to still see it happening. So the anger is definitely at the top, but for me, I can't let it drive me, because what's really happening is I'm really hurt. Like, damn, and I don't have kids, but that he had a whole child, like a whole child. And I don't believe people to like, who have children to be more worthy, but damn, like he was a father, like, and we walking right over that, like, because of traffic stops and all this shit. So I'm definitely like hurt as like a young like person of color. It's really hurtful, and above that, just really angry, to be honest. So.
I would just say from my perspective, I mean, for one thing, like, the staff meeting we had this morning at Menace Peacemakers is probably the most like cheerful staff meeting there's been in a long time. Just as an example of like how the collective energy has shifted, I think people were, relieved. There's a letting off some pressure there. And I could certainly feel that, as I was watching the verdict. And the other piece for me, like watching the verdict specifically, like I just was struck by how much, I guess, like empathy I felt, or I kind of saw myself in Derek Chauvin. Like, he's a white dude. He's probably a little bit older than me, but I was just really struck by like, I wasn't like happy that he was going to jail. I'm not saying he's obviously a person who's used probably an immeasurable amount of violence in his life, but there's just something like, I don't know, I just saw a lot of like the kind of anxiety and fear, and like we're talking about safety today, like there's something going on in America where like the people who are like actually the safest statistically are the most afraid and perceive the world as a very dangerous place. And I just saw that like kind of in his eyes. Like, I think he feels like everything he's done is very justified, because I think he and a lot of police view the world as like a very dangerous place, and their job is to like protect people and themselves, and probably protect whiteness. But yeah, that's kind of what I was feeling, like a mixture of like, yeah, I'm very happy for people who like, really needed this sense of justice, and then also just like a lot of sadness.
We can't hear you for some reason. Oh, I can't hear him. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you can't hear me because of my, I'm using a phone to do the audio because my computer is messed up. And so but you didn't miss anything. What I was going to say is that I was going to acknowledge that and say that sometimes we use whether the person's phone is marked red as a cue of when you can, when they're finished. Mine may not be on because they're, because it's just not working right this morning. So I want to acknowledge that. So I will mute on my phone, but it may not show up here. It happened fast, is what I would say. I remember it was like, okay, verdict at 4:02, done. And I remember going, wow, that was like really fast, right? And I remember leading up to it, because I spent a fair amount of time thinking about leading up to it and thinking about hearing all the sort of places closing down early and people boarding things up, and that the concern seemingly related to what you said, Sean. The concern being, are people going to burn down buildings and all of this kind of stuff? And I thought, really, that's really an interesting concern, given that this guy lost his life, and given that really universally it seems in this country we say that life is so sacred, above things. And so it's been really interesting to hear these parallel conversations about sort of the safety of businesses, and in the context of the lack of safety for these people of color and poor people. So that was kind of like something that's just been sort of in my head. So when the verdict happened, I was like, well, that was fast. And I wonder if the people who are boarding stuff up, how they feel. If they're probably relieved. I'm sure the governor and folks were relieved. But it was kind of meaningless that they were relieved, if you will, because the thing that we collectively built, right, which is providing, in my mind, this poison that allows this thing to happen, we've participated in, our government's participated in, and so I don't know that you should feel any relief right now. So that's that, and I think of it in terms of safety in the sense of, for all of the small businesses that I think were concerned, both before and after, I just wonder how much energy was put into sort of the lives of people who are dying all around you all the time unfairly, while you were concerned that your business opened at 8 in the morning. So my head is kind of in that place of like, this is we've got a lot of in my mind, reconsidering to do about sort of what safety means and what our responsibility for safety is, right? Both to ourselves and our families and our community, and the conversation about safety. With that, I'm out.
Thank you, Roderic. I think to Serrano's point that resonated with me most is about like how do you move past the urge of wanting to respond in very violent ways, right? Because as a mal-identified person, that's where we go. That's the easiest place that we can go, is to that place. But then being able to like draw yourself back from that, and go to that heartbreaking place, or to actually experience that hurt that you're talking about, Serrano, it takes time, it takes time, and it takes a lot of energy to actually be pulling myself from that. And I find that that's an experience that I've had to practice over years and continue to practice in moments like this, and in moments of seeing the killings that we've seen, in moments of thinking about, am I safe or am I not? And that it's very easy for me to choose the low-hanging fruit of violence, right? However that is, or whatever that looks like, whatever form that looks like, and to engage in that kind of a way. And that just engaging in that way and going to my own places of hurt and experiencing that, I had to work through my own places of like shame and guilt and that around weakness, around being less than a man, like all of those things. So it's making me think about that. And I think that that was like that every time these moments have happened, I've been able to actually like sort of build a new habit and a new way of actually relating to what is actually taking place, right? And how do I express my anger in ways that are healthy, quote unquote, and in a way where it doesn't actually impact other people's lives so much, right? Particularly women folks and queer folks' lives. It was funny that, you know, Roderic, you brought up the point about the buildings. And I think that that's a conversation to really be had, because if we do value life, why is it that sometimes we have to have the conversation, or why is there a debate about protecting these institutions and these buildings, right? Because they uphold something. These structures uphold something and they symbolize something, right? It's the same as the conversation around and the debate around the statues, the Confederate statues, and the Confederate flag. It symbolizes something, right? And it doesn't often symbolize the kinds of ways I think that we want to be in community with one another. But yet we think that those things are more meaningful than the life that is at stake. It was interesting that I had a conversation yesterday, or no, 2 days ago, with a group of Hmong men in my domestic violence class, and we were talking, and one of the men had made a comment saying, you know, like when people are being confronted by the police, they shouldn't run, right? And I was like, there's many examples and instances that people have ran, you know? And so being able to talk about like that, if I was wrong, or if the thinking was, if I was guilty, I wouldn't run. But I'm like, there's many people who actually run, whether they're guilty or not, they are running, you know, whether they've committed whatever or not, they still run. So I think I think for myself, I know it's like, it's a conversation, not only in these kinds of cross-cultural spaces that we built with other men in other communities, but like with the men in my own community, right? And having these conversations as well too. And then my sort of last thought, I have like these different diverging thoughts here, but my last thought that I've been thinking about for the last 2 weeks is, when we think about safety, it's like the father who raises the daughter and abuses the daughter, right? I am dad, I am father, therefore I can protect you. And in order for me to protect you, I may have to use harm. I may have to harm you, right? And I think that that relationship has been transplanted to the relationship that we have with the police, right? Like, we're gonna protect you, but if we may, and if we can, we will use violence to keep you safe. You know, to Sean Elmquist, what you were sharing earlier, like that's the relationship that we built, right, with the police, is we're gonna keep you safe, but at times we will keep you safe through using violence. The same as the dad saying, I'm gonna keep my daughter safe no matter what. You're not gonna go out at 10 at night. And if you do, I'm gonna ground you, or I'm gonna yell at you, or I'm gonna belittle you, or whatever the case, so that you don't actually go out, right? So because you experience violence, it isn't my fault that you experience the violence from me as your protector, but it's really because you made me do this, right? You made me get to this point. And so I can see that that's the parallel that's been unraveling for me in terms of the conversation about police protecting and then keeping us safe, but also being able to use violence at whatever cost to actually maintain that safety. And then it's really like maintaining that safety for who becomes the next question, right?
I think weirdly, like that's when you know it's real too. Like just bringing up the conversation about um, things versus people, right? Like fuck Walmart, fuck all those things. If somebody needs to say it, I will, and I'm cool with it. Like, cause that's but that's another point of those like heartbreaking moments, right? Where it's like we don't value life. Like I like not we do, but we don't value life as a unit. Like I have friends who like on a regular day say that they got my back, and these are white friends, of course. But like when things like that happen, the first thing you think about is a Walmart or a store. Like so the person just didn't die, or like that just didn't happen. And I think that really shows like an honesty on like where they're at as well. Like, because if somebody can say that, like, you don't really have a heart for that person if you yeah, I'm gonna say it. You don't have a heart for that person if you can say something like that. Like, for somebody to die in the first, or even the only thing you could talk about is like what happened after the fact. It's not even like he's like making it seem like he's up in fucking heaven dancing because we're burning shit down. Like that. First of all, that's not even the relationship as well. Like it's just hard to see that people are willing to care more about properties. Like anything can be built, and that's a reality. Like I don't know. I feel like when it's so hard because it's frustrating. Like it feels like it's obvious these things. I think that's another part that isn't spoken about. Like I feel like that's obvious to be like I can build another building. You can't build another human. Like you would at least I would have thought. I guess maybe I would have thought that was like very obvious from the heart. But I think sometimes the realization is that some people don't have that heart off of people. Like that's I don't even know like what be the reason. I guess is what I'm thinking about. Like why would you even come to having that be in the back of your mind? Like the buildings or the looting and things after that. Like it really shows. Yeah, just kind of the when you think that doing wrong things for good is okay for you, if that makes sense, because it relates back to the fucking to the Capitol building. Like those are the same people who were very very quiet, right? Very quiet, almost not around when people were destroying the Capitol building, and now we care about Walmart. We give a fuck about Walmart now and Target. So you really see to where like how they just need the control and the power to be in their hands. Like I deem this okay, but that, oh no, we're not doing that over here. But they're the same thing. Like if anything, I would assume, and I'm not big on culture stuff, I'm assuming the Capitol building is probably worth more than Walmart, if we're counting pennies. But yeah, I just think and that's people that I can't really have conversations with because I'm like I consider myself still young, and I can't like have that conversation with somebody who's like, "Yep, you're black, and I don't like that." Like I don't know if I could do it like up close and personal. So, but those are just the realizations and like the conversations that we see and that need to happen. So, thank you for bringing that part up.
I think it really begs the question, like we talked about 2 weeks ago, that I ask is the nuance in, yeah, it's like this life matters, and then it's like, but whose life actually matters? And whose life do we actually value, right? And I think that in us understanding white supremacy, in us understanding racism and systemic racism and institutionalized racism, we understand whose life actually matters at the end of the day, right? And I know that it doesn't look like mine, you know, and it doesn't look like me. I know that. So I think that that's what it begs us to think about. Like, how do we get folks to actually say, if you are about, all life matters, all lives matter, people. Like, if all life actually do matter, then why aren't you actually talking about the lives of Black men who are being killed at the hands of the police often? Like, why does that not matter? And why is it that the building actually matters more in that moment?
Um, you know, just going off of what folks have said, the thing that strikes me, in the end, like in our very capitalist society, commerce and keeping the wheels of the economy moving takes priority almost over almost everything. And on some level, the police, their function is to serve as the security guards of capital. Their job is to keep that moving above all else. And, that comes in a lot of different forms. And obviously, like, criminalizing Black folks, people of color, poor people, including poor white people, is, a huge part of the function of that is to maintain this order, that order, of exploitation, of hierarchy. Maintaining that order is vital to keeping everything moving, keeping those businesses open, and on some level, that's what they're there to do. And so when you have reactionaries being like, Blue Lives Matter, police are heroes, I think it all fits into this kind of elaborate mythology. Like everybody sort of has these stories that back up their own position within the system. And I think that's part of what was really difficult, or not difficult, complex about this verdict this week. Is like on some level, this, Derek Chauvin he lost the lottery. Like he was in the wrong place at the wrong time in his own terrible way, because he's going to be the cop that goes to jail. They throw a cop in jail once every 5 years or whatever, and this lets off, kind of releases pressure so that people don't just go flip the whole table over. And, it was like this close, theoretically. And so when I talked about that kind of collective sigh of relief, I think part of it is about that. And then on the other hand, it's like, okay, well, maybe somebody will actually, maybe this will be the tipping point where these guys will have to get, their ability to inflict violence with impunity will get pulled back. I don't want to be completely cynical is what I'm saying. It might very well be that there will be increased scrutiny over police and their use of violence. But I think also at the same time, we have to recognize like the very important function that police do serve to maintain like that order. And that order, like to Pheng's point, it really is built, it's really a hierarchy of who's of value of life, right? Whose life is the most valuable. And like police are, in a lot of ways, they're, whether they know it or not, they're there to enforce that order, make sure it doesn't get shifted the wrong way, I don't know. Some thoughts.
I think we lost Felix.
I thought it was interesting. When you think of policemen and you think of sort of manhood, if you will, masculinity. I was in Farmington the other day, well, months ago, when some of this was just going on. And it was very interesting because there were like, and this, I was, one of the things I do is I drop off these books to different police stations around the region. And at two of them that time, there were women with their children bringing cookies and pies and all of this stuff. It was right after George Floyd got killed. It was like maybe a week. And I thought this is really interesting, sort of as the manifestation of Blue Lives Matter too. Because I was like, I don't think this is just the out of the blue, if you will, thing where these folks are bringing cookies and making sure their children witness them saying thank you to the cops for what they're doing. I thought this is really interesting. So I was like, Farmington, maybe that's a community that I might not feel safe in, because it just seems so interesting that was the response to rally around the police. And I think that, and in my mind, I was thinking, you know, the police and men may not have you as a woman who is demonstrating their goodness to your kids. You're not first in the hierarchy. So if it came down to it, you know, what message about safety are you sending your children? You know, I think my assumption is the message was, you know, cops are good and we need to, they're important, and I want my kids to witness us thanking them. But boy, I thought that sends a confusing message when it would come home to roost. Because I think in part safety is about certainty. Someone talked about confusion earlier, right? And safety, yeah, in my mind, is about just being certain about an outcome. And it's funny because it's both, it's certain, because the certainty of the outcome was that he was not going to be convicted. They would find a way around that, right? So there was sort of this sense of, nope, we know the outcome is going to be that he gets away with this, right? But then there was the safety of like, the safety that he should, in any moral context, not get away with this. So I think that, so I'm kind of seeing safety as this thing that sort of both is very certainty about things that we think maybe are morally good and right, and then certainty about every time that this happens, you're going to go left, and I just know that, right? So my safety, it's almost like someone being in an abusive relationship, right? I know if I do this, you're going to do that. And so it's given me, I do what I do because I know how you're going to respond, and whether it's bad or good, I'm safer that way, if you will. Even though in some situations you're not really safe, if that makes sense. Okay, with that I'm out.
I think that in some ways, paralleling or building off of what both Sean and Roderic, you both shared there, that's coming to my mind is on the safety of good and bad, and on the complexity of the nuances of like the story of good police officers, quote unquote, and then bad police officers, right? I think about, going back to this scenario that I shared earlier about the father who had abused the daughter, that it's really important that at the same time that I think, I shouldn't say it's important, but that some survivors of abuse would share that the person who had abused them, they see in good light. And they also see that person in a bad light at the same time too, right? So how can we tell stories that are actually like rounded, and it doesn't fit into the binary of this black and white thinking of like, it has to be only good only and it can't be bad, right? Or let's just pick out the bad apples and forget about the nuances of like the systemic thing that's at play as well too, to Sean's point earlier about the alleviation from police officers at this moment. And so I think that, to me, that was what was coming to my mind in terms of like, how do we tell stories about like all of it? Because to Sean's earlier point about feeling like some sympathy towards Derek Chauvin is that we know that at the end of the day, at least I know in my community, that most men are not, as much as they cause harm in our community, are not disposable, right? We don't always want to be saying, hey, let's just lock up all Hmong men and throw away the key. That doesn't solve anything for our community. At least in my community, it doesn't solve that, right? And so how do we think about, I think going back to our conversation 2 weeks ago, how do we think about justice in ways that actually like really, really transforms our lives, even the people who've caused harm, right? And how do we also acknowledge that even if I'm not the person to work with that person who causes harm, there may be other people who will play that role and do that role, right? Yeah, so I think that there's just so much complexity and nuances in the conversation that things are unraveling, as they often are within me, about how do we get all of us to say that if life actually matters, how do we actually make life matter for everybody, right? And if life is valuable, then how do we make it valuable for everybody? And it includes people who've committed harm too. It can't just be like, let's just throw them away too at the same time, right? So I don't want this conversation to just be about like, at least to me, for us to not forget about those folks at the same time too, right? As much as we know that that person at the end of the day had that choice and made that choice. In this case, Derek Chauvin, right, making the choice that he had made. And the officer, I forgot what her name is, in Brooklyn Center, that made the choice that she made, right? And the father who abuses his daughter, made that choice, and they still have to be accountable for that choice that they made. There has to be some accountability.
That's a good question though. Like, how are you able to tell that story? Because even as I said earlier, like I try not to lie after like a certain point in my life. So, but I do also have, right, like I say fuck Walmart, but I have like actual like friends who are like, you know, policemen or women and things like that. So I think like as far as like telling that story, for me, it revolves around being honest, to be honest. Like it revolves around being honest in the moment in time, being honest about how it made you feel. So let's say if I wanted to express a story about like, i.e. a good cop, which in theory, it's weird how they all disappear when shit like this happened too, right? But like the theory of like the good cop is like, how do I explain that in the hood? Because I'm actually from the hood. I'm from Bronx, New York, where we ain't trust a white soul, right? Like if you didn't grow up with me, like because I grew up with white people as well that were poor, but if you didn't grow up with me, we didn't trust a white soul. So how do I explain that to them? Right? Like, cause that's gonna be a mismatch. They're gonna be like, Serrano, we're not trying to hear that shit. We don't fuck with the police. And I have to at least force something to be like, all right, there's this one time where I could have been fucked and he helped me out. He saw me as a human. So I think but that's what we have to do though, right? Like I would actually take a stand as quick as I would for a fucked up cop, to be honest. But that's because I want to see the youth see what's real as well. And what was an interesting point, like Roderic, about what you said about the mom and the children is like, I can now already see the separation in like in the reality of how cops treat people or the reality of cops in general. Because sadly, those kids that you saw are gonna have like probably like a false reality. Because I work with youth that are 8 to 12, and we went on a trip about 2 years ago to Planet 3. It's like a trampoline park. So really fun at the end of the school year, and there's about 12 kids, couple adults for chaperoning, and we're in the back of a bus and we're just chilling. We're on our way there. Um, Out of sheer nowhere, all the kids. I mean, we have kids of color, but we offer like our group to everybody. So in this particular group, we had kids of all identities, from color to genders. All the kids like shot down, like I mean, like literally like disappeared. Like some of them hid under the seats, some of them like hid under like the back of seats. And I turn around, I'm like, what the? Because I'm like, from me being from the hood, I'm like, that ain't a good sign. Let me turn around real quick, and it's a cop car behind us. Simple, simple, but this is what made these kids fucking cringe. Like, I go to look back, and they're all literally like running away from the back of the bus, like scared. Like, so I think that, like, I don't know, like that would probably because that would probably help some kids as well for them to show that like not every human who decides to be a cop is bad. Like, I believe the whole cop system is fucking terrible, to be honest. But I don't think that every human who decides to be a cop is awful, if that all makes sense. And if yeah, because I would fight that 99% of them are bad, like, but there are a few that like go against the system, that go against. It would be cool to see it more publicized, of course. That would be dope to see a cop put another cop in the head, like, or just something, like something for us to be like, yes, we're on the side, and not some of these, because that's a little story. It's big for me, but it might not even register to the folks in the hood. But I still have to tell it because that's what I went through, and that's something that's going to actually help. So I think for me, like how to tell that story in a fruitful and honest way is to be honest, like, because that was my only situation where I had a good like running with the cops. I've been pulled over for literally no reason too. So I'm not going to be against saying that either. I think being honest on both parts, being honest on the humanity that I lived through both of them, or the lack thereof of one side of it, will really actually help people. So I don't know, maybe for me, like just the honesty and like with empathy to people, but just being honest about how the story shaped you and how it, because I still don't trust no cop, right? At all, like not even a little bit. Like I don't want nothing to do with you. But I can't forget about the person, about the human, about that person, right? In that moment in time. So I don't know, but that's a really, really good question of like, how do we still have that story, or how do we still tell that story?
Roderic, we aren't able to hear you. Unmute your phone.
I'm back. Sorry. One of the things I think that is interesting is that they talked about was apparently the number of cops who didn't seem to have his back. And I thought about that in relationship to how men say, yes, that man who beat his wife, etc., is bad. Nope, what the atmosphere that we've got here, nothing to see here, right? The atmosphere we got here is fine. That's a bad apple. Toss him out. And so I, in trying to tell a nuanced story, in trying to tell a story, I guess one story I would probably try to draw that parallel between sort of the responsibility of the police as an institution in whatever city, and the responsibility of groups of men, and that it's more genuine to accept the responsibility you bear for letting those men do the things they do over time. This, he was not new. Everybody, for letting that sort of atmosphere grow, and then when something goes wrong, not saying we've got to self-correct. It's like the guy who shot mostly Asian people in Georgia, and the church going, oh, they washed their hands of him so quickly, and it's like, is there any self-examination, church, of what you fostered, right? Or do you go back to your normal way of being, not changed by the person that you have not wanted to rehabilitate? They don't seem to want to rehabilitate Chauvin. They want to say, nope, he did it, he's convicted, nothing to see here, which I think is a disappointing. So the story I guess I would tell is sort of a parallel to have people examine what we do that supports those others who we have some sort of influence or interaction with. Now I'm out.
Just real quick, something that comes to mind, like thinking about like cops as individuals. This is like one of the as opportunities for people to have, a livable wage, and a stable job with like benefits. Being a police officer is like, it's a huge pool of organized labor and opportunities for people and communities. And yeah, so I mean, just like, it makes it complicated to just sort of abolish police overnight. If not difficult, it makes it complicated. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the case. These could be like living wage jobs for community liaisons who are like doing a really important function in society. it doesn't have to be this way. You know, I already talked about like my own sort of theories of what I think the function of police are, but it, you know, that could be changed to Roderic's point, to Serrano's point. But I think you'd have to have a pretty big fundamental shift in society and the conditions that we exist within. You know, instead of just picking individual officers and even individual departments, because on some level they're just fulfilling their mandate, you know.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, in that mandate part of it, there's a lot of discretion in terms of how they move and what, again, to my point earlier, what choices that they make, right? And it's inhibited, obviously, in their own, in the structure of racism as well, too, because that's what it was built off of. And that's what it's built to be, is to do that protecting that we were talking about earlier. And I agree that how do we then shift that into something different, right? And being in a different relationship and like transforming that institution and those practices into something that's completely different and away from the way in which we are understanding and relating to what policing is today, currently at this moment. So that's what I am thinking, because there's actually a lot of resources we've shared about how people can transfer skills, right? And there's a lot of valuable skills there. You know, for one, I went through all of that training and education in my undergraduate in terms of becoming a police officer, but never went into that role, right? And I gained a lot of skills through that, but it's transferable skills that I use these days in the work that I do to engage men and masculine folks, right? It gave me a different perspective about looking at choice and discretion and things like that. And so I think that even if it is abolished and it's not here, people still will have jobs because those skills can be transferred elsewhere and can be used in other ways in community for, like, how do we do it and how do those skills become more skills that could be to enhance people's lives, right? Rather than as a use of force to actually like using violence, you know, and to that safety question again to that safety question again.
You know, I completely agree, because I think, like, for me, it helps go back to like the realistic, like, of a situation, or realistic of life, right? Like, I think if you calm, which it will be hard, if you calmed everybody down today, like, the answer of do we actually need like some form of law and order will be yes. And the reason why is because we're not starting off the world today. Like, I'm not an advocate of like policing or like gun ownership in the beginning of time, right? In the beginning of time, it was not needed. We don't need it. Like, it shouldn't have been something that we started off with. But the reality of where we're living at now, that's the part where you got to stick your feet in the mud. Like, you can't be all caring about the situation. If we abolish police today, there's somebody who's going to be getting harmed tomorrow. What do we have for that? So for me, it actually boils down to like the reality. Like, that's actually what helps me as far as like realism. It's like, no, I could get shot tomorrow and not even by a cop, to be honest. So, right, like, this is just the world that we're living in. It's also fair to be realistic about the world you're living in, while simultaneously working for a better world. That's what I live in. That's what I do. I work with kids for a better world, while simultaneously knowing that I'm a 25-year-old man from the hood. Like, that still has those ways and those auras. So I can get killed tomorrow and it might not even be police involved. It's just a reality that we live in. So I think that but you have to calm everybody down for us to understand that, because nobody want to hit cop right now. So I think that was like a real like good name that you gave, Sean, as far as like liaison, even just a name in general. I think like we can find some like just some people who literally became cops just because of the name. If this don't go through your skull, like, just because of the name of like the hierarchy, like police officer, I get the police. And I think literally, even if we've changed the name to just like liaison or just something that didn't sound so fucking wild, or like some wild west shit, it would be like, even, and we find out that words mean a lot, right? Like, even that. So I completely agree, because like tomorrow we would actually need somebody to help, you know, somebody's grandma who got robbed, or person who got hit by a car or something like that. So, but definitely the systematic part needs to go. But how do you have that conversation, right? And I think it comes down to the realistic, like of telling people like, hey, if we get rid of all cops or all people who police today, what would happen if your grandma were to be robbed? What would actually happen? Now, you don't want the asshole cop to come here and blame your black grandma because she's been robbed. You don't want that at all. But you at least want somebody to come and aid to your 65 plus year old grandma's aid, right? So I think, but that's when people are calmed down. And how do you get all that? So I'm sorry that probably made it more complicated. But I just wanted to agree with that because, yeah, in the beginning of time, no, I don't believe in guns or policing or none of that shit. I don't. But we're not in the beginning of time anymore. We're in a realistic world where people literally thrive off of misery or success. So
I think it is so real, that that the violence is not going to end. But what's real is how do we actually teach people the skills to navigate the violence when it actually shows up, right? And I'm not talking about de-escalation skills or defense tactics or like self-defense classes. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like how do we work with ourselves and individuals and families and people to move and maneuver in the thick of the violence when the bullets are flying, when somebody's actually doing something, right? So, and I think that it's sort of like, I haven't like formulated my thinking fully around that yet, but what I do know is that you do have to be centered in some ways to actually move through that violence, and be able to actually arrive on the other end, and wherever you arrive, right, on the end of that violence, and that there will be impact. And how are you going to then deal with that impact in terms of the hurt and the harm that comes along with that violence? And so I think the violence will continue to exist, but it's really in how do we get the skills and people to shift their relationship to be with violence instead of being in this reactionary mode to it, or in this like, I need to cut it off and just ignore it, or I need to just run away from that violence, right? Because those tend to be the responses that we see in community, with regards to violence. So I think that that might be a good somewhat ending point and segue to 2 weeks conversation from now is what is the violence and how do we actually navigate that as men and masculine folks, going to Serrano's earlier point, of how did he move to heartbreak from his anger, right? Any closing thoughts here, from any of you? I hope Felix is okay because he didn't come back, so I hope he's okay.
Yeah, I would say just I also think about sometimes we have the wrong target or we have a singular target. And so I think that the police are a target, but I also have to say that I think that people should also think about the complicity of a jury who has said that sort of the reasonable person standard, and it's like the reasonable person standard around Black men being shot and people of color being shot by cops is not a reasonable standard, right? It's not a moral standard, right? It might be a reasonable standard, but it's not a moral standard. And how can we be mindful that the work is bigger than cops retraining, right? Because the stamp has been, if the cops are there to fortify capitalism, which I think they are, the juries give that a stamp of approval. They say life is not as important as the material. And so I know I'm thinking about sort of juries, and when I say juries, I mean the public being the target of re-education, if you will. And with that, I'm out.
no, that was a great point. Thank you for that. Definitely, damn, that blew my mind. But I would say like how I'm feeling. I'm definitely feeling better now, and I think because I'm able to have this conversation. Like I said earlier, I'm very like angry, so I'm not trying to be in somebody's face where they're extremely red and racist, and I'm able to. No, I want to punch somebody in their face right now. And I'm okay with that. So I'm cool with being able to actually have this conversation with y'all and with people who understand and being able to actually be myself. So that's how I'm feeling for sure. Thank you.
For my part, I just appreciate y'all having me. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you for all of you who joined us on Facebook as well, or later on as you watch these conversations later on. Hopefully it brings something to you and you're able to continue these conversations with other men and masculine folks in your own life who you are in relationship with, and really build off of what does justice and safety look like for our communities, and how do we actually think about, to Rogeric's point, something that's bigger than policing as a means of safety, right? Really appreciating all of the siblings and brothers here who had made it and joined in the conversation. Definitely appreciating Austin for the background work that he does in terms of the logistics and holding the chat in our moment in this conversation, and hoping that Felix is okay, because he had dropped, I think, Wi-Fi or something halfway through, and so I'll definitely reach out to him and see if he's okay. But thanks to all that joined us at this moment, and for our 18th conversation in our kitchen table conversation series, and we'll continue in the next 2 weeks as well. It always happens on bi-weekly Thursdays at noon. And wanting to also appreciate the partnership from our philanthropy partners, Blue Cross Blue Shield Minnesota and the Novo Foundation, for supporting us and supporting this to happen as well too. So until next time, thank you very much.